Video game graphics have come a really long way from their blocky pixel art styles to today, where we see stunning realistic graphics. And back in the early days of gaming, game companies primarily focused on gameplay rather than graphics, whereas today is kind of the opposite, it's graphics over gameplay, and that's all to do with the early 2000s and a shift in technology. Back in the late 90s and 2000s and even today, there has been a significant shift to realistic graphics. Games like Metal Gear Solid 2 and the Crysis series were all renowned for their graphics, and to be honest, it just became a selling point because realism was being associated with quality, and if you could see a blade of grass shifting in the wind, then the quality of that game must be amazing. And also immersion got linked with how quickly it could mimic reality. By I'd say around maybe the 2010s, the gaming industry kind of took a new perspective on what good graphics meant. Hyper-realistic games like Red Dead Redemption 2, for example, where you could see visible pores and sweat and hair growth and individual hair fibers. These are all things that are associated with good graphics. But later and later, as we got into the 2010s, stylized graphics kind of made their way back into the mainstream, prioritizing a unique art style over graphical fidelity. For example, the Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild, didn't focus on realism when it came to its graphics. Instead, it had a soft aesthetic which catered to the mood, colour palette, and environmental exploration, and it's been really praised for its charm and aesthetic. And then you have a game like Cuphead, for example, with its unique 1930s aesthetic, trying to stay away from a realistic or pixelated platform and instead taking a brand new attempt at a platformer. And its exaggerated visuals are a stark contrast from a realistic game. The gap between good and realistic has only got wider. Realistic games often primarily focus on tech prowess at this point, but many games use creativity and an artistic vision to create a deeper impact when it comes to their games. You look at something like Cyberpunk 2077 and you cannot dispute that that game does not look incredibly realistic, with its lighting and textures all stuff that make players really feel immersed in the world. However, that kind of graphical fidelity also does come at a cost. If we remember that Cyberpunk 2077 didn't exactly have the best launch, in fact it was probably one of the most buggiest launches of all time, and so these realistic graphics do have a cost. And in comparison, you have something like Hades with its comic book aesthetic with big bold colours and exaggerated characters. There was no photorealism needed when it came to Hades, and in fact the art style only elevated the narrative and overall experience of the game. And I think a big factor when it comes to the shift from realistic graphics to more stylized stuff is definitely the indie scene. Indie developers don't often have the resources that big companies do, and so they have to adapt and make do with what they can. A game like Undertale has a minimalist art style, but that is only reflected through the gameplay's narrative and lets you fill in the blanks where you can. And a game like Celeste, with its retro-inspired graphics, only needs its narrative to help push the story along, and the charming pixelated graphics only aid to it. But you can also think about stylized graphics versus realistic graphics, like realistically which one is going to last the longest when it comes to gaming, and to be honest, I would have to say stylized, purely because it's going to age a lot better. If realistic graphics today may not be realistic graphics in the next 20 years or so, whereas a stylized art style is forever young. A game like Okami with its Japanese ink-washed art style still looks fantastic to this day. And that game came out in 2006, but the graphics are so timeless that it will still last for a very, very long time. If we just take a look at Metal Gear Solid 2, for example, I mentioned it earlier, but the graphics at the time were revolutionary. It was probably one of the most realistic games that you could come across at the time, but compared to today, it is not the best looking game. And that's the problem with realistic graphics, is that they just don't stick forever. And as I've said throughout this entire video, the definition of good graphics isn't just down to realism anymore, it's how the graphical art style can cater to the narrative. And as well if they fit the tone and the story, for example, because a game like Call of Duty, for example, isn't gonna work with a cartoon art style because that's not Call of Duty. Call of Duty is branded as a realistic game, whereas a game like Ori Will of the Wisps is only added to by its dreamlike fantasy art style, because good graphics aren't really about being realistic. It's about how they add to the overall experience and how they make the player immersed in the world retrospectively, depending on what game you're playing. And I really do think there has been a definite shift in realistic graphics versus art style, for example. I think this era is really about kind of artistic vision and how game developers want to express their game, which means that if a game needs photorealism or if it needs a cool pixelated art style or a cartoon aesthetic, then if it caters to that game, then I am all for it. But I really do think it's an interesting discussion because there are a lot of factors that contribute to both sides. But let me know what you think. Do you think art style really does matter, or are you not really that bothered about it?